Tonight, we wander quietly through the stone halls and hidden chambers of medieval castles, uncovering their secrets at a pace slow enough to dream by. The world outside your modern window fades, and in its place rises the silhouette of a medieval castle. Its stone walls glow faintly against a pale dawn sky, edges softened by mist, as though even the castle itself hasn't yet woken. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and damp moss, a chill that cuts right to your nose. You pull your cloak tighter. Not that it's a real cloak, but in your mind, it feels rough, scratchy, and lined with someone else's wool. Already you sense, this isn't a trip of comfort. But don't worry, you came here to relax, to listen, to drift. And as I remind you gently, you probably won't make it through this day. Not because of any medieval danger, though there's plenty of that, but simply because sleep may find you first. Before we step into the courtyard, let me whisper the one modern task all storytellers are bound by. If you enjoy wandering through history like this, tap that little subscribe button. It helps keep the candles lit in these old halls. And leave a comment, too. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's a little like sending a note tied to a pigeon, except less messy. Now take a long breath. Feel your shoulders ease. The torches along the castle wall burn low, the embers quiet. You hear faint voices inside, a horse shifting its weight against wood, water dripping from the eaves. This place is alive, but slowly, almost reluctantly. So now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You step through the outer gate. The wooden doors are heavy, banded with iron. They look as though no one's oiled them in decades, which is probably true, because castle gates weren't exactly maintained with WD-40. Instead, they creak like groaning giants. Inside, you find yourself in the bailey, the open courtyard. Chickens peck at the muddy ground, ignoring you entirely. A skinny dog trots by, its ribs visible, eyeing the hens as if calculating something daring but foolish. The ground smells faintly of hay, horse dung, and last night's rain. You're not exactly in Versailles here, more like a very secure barnyard. Castles, after all, weren't built to impress you with marble. They were built to keep enemies out and peasants in line. The walls loom above, gray and thick, casting long shadows even in the morning light. They whisper a fact to you. Many of these walls were once painted. Yes, castles were often covered in bright pigments, red, yellow, white. Historians still debate whether some of the gaudy colors were meant to intimidate enemies or just make gloomy walls feel less depressing. If you thought medieval life was all grayscale, think again. In one corner, a boy carries a bucket of water from the well. His boots splash in the mud. He looks exhausted already, and it's not even breakfast. You know the feeling. Sometimes even your morning coffee feels like a medieval labor tax. And speaking of breakfast, do not expect croissants. What you get is pottage. A thick, gray stew of barley, peas, maybe an onion if you're lucky. It simmers in a blackened pot over the fire, and you can smell it faintly now, earthy, bland, with that unmistakable note of you'll eat this and like it. A woman stirs the pot, her hair hidden beneath a linen coif. She hums something tuneless. When she catches you watching, she gives the briefest nod. She knows you're not from here. But in the weary rhythm of castle life, one more odd face doesn't matter. Everyone's too busy surviving to ask questions. You drift closer to the inner keep, Its tall stone tower rises like a giant finger pointing skyward, a reminder of both power and paranoia. The keep is where the Lord and his family live, safe above the chaos of courtyard life. You notice narrow slit windows, arrow loops. If you lean close, you feel a cold draft slipping out. Those slits were just wide enough for an archer to shoot through, but narrow enough to keep incoming arrows out. Clever, practical. Though if you lived here, you'd quickly discover they also made the rooms as cheerful as a root cellar. Remember the sound of the dripping water earlier? You hear it again, louder now, echoing from a side passage. That's the cistern, the castle's lifeline during sieges. Rainwater funnels into deep stone tanks, keeping the garrison alive when enemies circle outside. Imagine being trapped here for months, drinking tepid water and eating stale bread. Suddenly, your modern fridge feels like divine luxury. A curious tidbit: some castles even had secret latrines dropping waste straight down the walls, sometimes into the moat. And yes, enemies occasionally tried climbing up those channels. Risky business. Historians note with some delight that it rarely ended well. The sun climbs a little higher, illuminating the inner walls with a soft, golden glow. Dust drifts lazily in the air. Somewhere, a rooster crows late, as if even he couldn't be bothered to start the day on time. You lean against the rough stone. It feels cool under your palm. Centuries of weather, war, and weary hands have smoothed certain edges. You realize something. Castles are less about grandeur and more about persistence. They endure. And so you walk further into the heart of the castle's waking day. By now, the courtyard hums with slow, practical energy. It's not bustling like a marketplace. More like everyone is reluctantly winding a crank that turns the wheel of life. A blacksmith hammers at the forge. Sparks fly like tired fireflies, briefly beautiful before fading. The ringing of iron against iron echoes around the walls. Each strike seems to say, "Yes, this takes forever." The smith wipes sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of soot. His apprentice, a boy barely taller than the anvil, watches with wide eyes, handing over tools with trembling hands. Apprenticeships weren't internships. There's no coffee run here, only years of servitude until you're deemed good enough not to ruin everything. Nearby, a group of women kneel by wooden tubs, scrubbing laundry in cold water. Their knuckles are red, their breath fogs in the chill air. Linen shifts and woolen tunics slap wetly against the wood. One of them sighs, muttering something about stains that never come out. You sympathize. Laundry, it turns out, has been annoying for 1,000 years. And then, out of the corner of your eye, you catch movement on the wall. Guards. 2 of them pace slowly, spears in hand, trying to look alert but mostly looking bored. Life as a castle guard wasn't glamorous. You stood for hours in the wind, watching for enemies who almost never appeared. Imagine being paid in bread and ale to stare at the horizon all day. You've had Zoom meetings livelier than this. The lord of the castle appears briefly. You see him on a raised wooden balcony, his cloak heavy, trimmed with fur. He gazes down at the courtyard like someone inspecting their Wi-Fi signal. His presence carries weight, literally, in his richly lined tunic, but also serves as a reminder. You are in his world. This is his fortress, his power, his stone-walled insurance policy. One fact worth savoring: castles were not built overnight. Some took decades, even centuries, to finish. Generations of masons left their marks, sometimes literally carving symbols into the stone. If you look closely at the wall beside you, you notice faint scratches. A mason's mark, a signature left behind, like a medieval version of tagging your name in wet cement. Historians still debate whether these marks were mostly practical, to tally work for payment, or spiritual, a kind of protective charm. Maybe both. At the edge of the bailey you spot a dovecot, round, stone, dotted with little holes. Inside, pigeons flutter and coo. They aren't here for charm. They're food, they're messengers, they're recycling systems for scraps. In fact, pigeon droppings were collected for use in tanning leather. You can imagine the smell. Speaking of smell, the air around the stables is particularly pungent. Horses stamp, their manes tangled, their eyes rolling toward you suspiciously. Stable boys rush about with armfuls of hay, shouting, slipping in the muck. One boy nearly drops a bucket over his own foot, and the horse he's feeding gives him a look that says, "Amateur." It's one of those quiet truths. Medieval horses may not have had social media, but they definitely had opinions. You wander toward a corner where a woman sells small trinkets. Carved bone combs, pins, and tiny religious charms. She sits on a low stool, her goods spread on a cloth. Her fingers are quick, her eyes sharper than the dagger at her belt. She doesn't smile, but she doesn't need to. Her wares speak for her. Bits of hope and vanity in a world where luxury is rare. Here's your cultural tidbit. Lice combs were among the most common small finds in castles. They weren't decorative, they were survival tools. Imagine the medieval morning routine: wake up, stretch, check for lice. Again, some things make you grateful for shampoo. Above, clouds drift lazily, the sky pale and thin. A bell tolls somewhere, a single heavy note. It marks the hour, but it also feels like it marks your heartbeat, slow and steady. You sit on a worn bench near the wall. A cat hops up beside you, its fur patchy, tail flicking. It regards you with suspicion, then decides you're unworthy of notice. Cats in castles weren't pampered pets. They were pest control. Still, you can't help but feel the same universal truth. Cats have always believed they own the place. The day stretches on. Work continues. And you realize, in this castle, time doesn't rush. Plods, trudges. It meanders like an ox in a muddy field. Yet, in its own way, it's steady, grounding, secure. The stone walls rise around you, embracing you like a rough, stern parent. You close your eyes for a moment. The sounds mingle. Hammering, chickens, distant laughter, the crackle of fire. It all blurs into a medieval lullaby, carrying you further into the story. The morning begins to stretch itself awake, though in this castle, morning doesn't really feel like a luxury. You shuffle along the courtyard stones, which are damp from last night's rain, and every uneven cobble seems to tilt slightly in the wrong direction, just enough to make you wobble. You'd think someone would fix the paving after 2 centuries of kings and dukes, but then again, laborers are more likely patching walls, tending fires, or arguing about grain taxes. The ground, apparently, can stay uneven. Your breath fogs in the air, mingling with the smell of roasting barley porridge from the kitchen block. A gaggle of children dart past you. Apprentices, errand boys, and maybe one child who has no business being here but tagged along anyway. They laugh and you catch a whiff of straw on their clothes. There's a lesson to be learned here. Children, no matter the century, can somehow smell like goats. A horn blows from the wall above, the signal of guard change. That's the rhythm of castle life. Really. The horn that tells you who's standing watch, who's carrying spears, and who gets to warm their feet by the fire until the next shift. Historically, most castles didn't employ vast armies. A few dozen men-at-arms, some with training, some with enthusiasm only, were expected to guard these thick walls. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. And the stew was free. You pass the armory door, which stands open, and inside you see racks of spears gleaming with oil. A young squire drags a chainmail shirt across a wooden bench, muttering under his breath at the sheer weight of the thing. Mail wasn't light. If you ever fancy the idea of running a marathon in metallic socks, this would be your uniform. Scholars still debate exactly how long soldiers could fight in full mail before exhaustion took them out of the action. Probably not as long as the poems claimed. There's a detail you can't ignore. In the dim light of the armory, a half-broken banner slouches in the corner. Its fabric is torn, the crest barely recognizable. It might have once belonged to an enemy captured in battle. Or maybe it's just been forgotten as castles collected relics the way you collect mugs, too many, and most chipped. As you leave the armory, the sound of church bells drifts into the yard. It's not melodious. It's more of a dull iron clang that settles into your bones. The chapel lies just off the great hall, and already figures in wool cloaks shuffle toward it. The castle chaplain, eyes heavy with both knowledge and boredom, waits to recite the daily prayers. Religion here isn't optional. It's the schedule. Without bells, you wouldn't know when to eat, when to sleep, or when to stop pretending to work. You slip into the edge of the chapel. The air smells of beeswax and damp stone. A flickering candle paints shadows across frescoes. Though most are so faded you'd have to squint to decide if you're looking at a saint or just someone who dropped paint on the wall. And yet, the villagers and castle staff kneel earnestly, whispering prayers. Some pray for safety, others for good harvest. One man, possibly, prays that his neighbor's chickens mysteriously stop laying eggs. Petty rivalries don't skip prayer time. And here's the strange tidbit. In many medieval castles, chapels were considered so holy that even animals couldn't be brought inside. Yet there are records of lords keeping falcons perched on chapel benches, because apparently hunting birds counted as an exception. Nothing quite says devotion like kneeling before an altar while a hawk stares down at you, possibly judging your Latin. The prayer ends. You yawn, quietly, though someone catches it and smirks. A cheeky warning for you. You probably won't survive the endless bells of this castle day without nodding off at least once. That's normal. Even lords do it. Now, as the chapel empties, you hear the faintest sound echoing in the courtyard again. Boots, shouts, and the clatter of practice weapons. It's time for training. You step back into the courtyard, and the scene feels almost theatrical. A row of young squires is lined up, wooden swords in hand, their instructor barking at them with a voice that could strip bark from a tree. Each boy tries to look serious, though one keeps swatting flies with his practice blade. The instructor whirls on him, shouting about discipline, but you can see the amused twitch in his beard. Even in a fortress, teenagers will be teenagers. The clash of practiced swords fills the air, wood smacking against wood, the dull thud of shields. The squires grunt, stumble, and sometimes laugh when one of them trips over his own boots. You can smell the dust kicking up from their boots, mingling with the sweat of the older men sparring nearby. A knight in shining mail adjusts his helm and spars slowly, letting the younger ones circle him like nervous chickens. He parries each clumsy swing with ease, and finally raps one lad on the shoulder with a dull clang. The boy yelps and the others laugh. Better the shoulder than the head. The knight grins. And here's a historical fact worth noting. Real medieval training often used blunt swords or wooden versions, but even so, injuries were frequent. A bruised rib or a broken nose was part of the curriculum. One chronicler even described a prince who trained so recklessly, he knocked himself unconscious during a mock joust. Hardly the heroic image painted in ballads. Nearby, a man sharpens real swords on a whetstone, the screeching sound cutting across the courtyard. He doesn't join in the sparring, just watches with the disinterested air of someone who knows the real danger isn't in practice yards. It's on the battlefield, where swords don't politely stop at wooden shields. Then you notice something stranger. Tucked against the wall, a boy no older than 12 practices with a bow. His arrows barely stick into the straw target, drooping halfway down. But one actually hits the mark. Not the bullseye, not even close, but enough to earn a small nod from the archer master. Archery, unlike swordplay, was considered a serious lifelong skill, and in England it was legally mandated that men practice it on Sundays. Yes, instead of football, you got archery. Imagine your local park filled not with frisbees, but with arrows flying everywhere. Comforting, isn't it? There's also a curious tidbit for you. In some castles, training included not just combat, but falconry. Young nobles learned to raise, hood, and hunt with falcons as a sign of refinement. One record even mentions a falcon stealing meat straight from the Lord's dinner table. Perhaps that's why they were welcome in chapels. The birds had more clout than most servants. The practice session grows louder. You find yourself drawn to the energy of it, the shouts and clanging steel echoing between the high stone walls. It's like living inside a drum. Dust hangs in the sunlight, and you can feel the pulse of routine here. This isn't pageantry. It's maintenance. Training, guarding, praying, eating again and again, day after day. But as you stand there, another sound interrupts. The grinding creak of the portcullis being raised. Someone's arriving. The squires stop mid-swing to gawk, while the instructor bellows at them to keep moving. Through the gate walks a small caravan. 2 carts, one laden with barrels, the other with bolts of cloth. Merchants. The scene shifts now from practice to business. And if you thought castle life was only swords and banners, prepare to be surprised. Merchants had more power than most spears. The merchants trundle into the courtyard, their carts creaking with the slow dignity of tired oxen. The wheels leave muddy streaks across the stones, and immediately a servant groans, because guess who has to scrub that later? Not the Lord. The first cart is stacked with barrels bound in iron hoops. They smell faintly of salted fish, the kind of smell that seeps into your clothes and lingers for weeks. The second is piled high with cloth, coarse wool and dull browns. A few strips dyed in brighter reds and blues, the sort of colors you'd wear if you wanted to show off at the next feast. The steward arrives, clutching his ledger like it's a holy relic. His face is pinched, as though he's perpetually calculating the difference between what the merchants want and what the castle can afford. Negotiations begin half-whisper, half-argument. Words like tax, levy, and royal tariff float in the air. The merchants complain about toll roads. The steward complains about short measure. History, it turns out, is a long chain of people haggling and sighing about money. You notice how everyone's eyes stray to the cloth cart. In a world where most people own perhaps two sets of clothes, the one you wear every day and the one you wear to not look like death at church, new cloth is luxury. A child leans in too close, running grubby fingers over a strip of bright blue wool, before being yanked away by his mother. That cloth, when cut and stitched, might become a gown for a lady, or at least a good blanket against the drafts that creep under castle doors. And here's the little secret about castles. They weren't self-sufficient fortresses. For all the myths of sealed-off strongholds, most castles desperately needed trade. Without merchants, the wine cellars would be empty, the kitchens would run out of spice, and worst of all, there'd be no salt for winter. Salt, the real treasure of the medieval world, came at a price. Too expensive, and your peasant's pork would rot by spring. Too cheap, and the Lord might suspect it's mixed with sand. As deals are struck, a servant begins unloading the barrels, rolling them toward the cellar stairs. You hear the dull thump, 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 like distant drumbeats of an approaching feast. The cloth gets carried into the hall under strict watch, because someone always has sticky fingers. And as the merchants bow their way out, the steward marks his ledger with a sharp scratch of quill. Business concluded, the castle exhales. Trade is done, but dinner waits, because while coin keeps the castle running, it's food that keeps people sane. The kitchen is alive before you even step inside. The doorway itself is like a mouth. Heat and smoke billow out, carrying the mingled smells of roasting meat, onions frying in fat, and bread just starting to brown in the ovens. If you've ever felt hungry before bed, this is not the section to linger in. Inside, the scene is equal parts chaos and choreography. A cook barks orders while a dozen assistants scurry about like bees. One chops leeks, another plucks feathers from a limp goose, while two more haul buckets of water from the well. A boy turns a spit over the fire, his eyes glazed with the dull endurance of someone who's been doing this all morning and knows he'll still be doing it at sundown. You glance at the preparation tables, thick planks scarred with years of knife cuts. Bread dough rises under rough cloths, waiting to be shoved into the oven. A cauldron bubbles suspiciously, its surface frothing with herbs and something stringy you'd rather not identify. Castle meals were rarely dainty. They were hearty, filling, and sometimes alarming. And here's a fact worth tasting. Medieval kitchens weren't just about food, they were about spectacle. If a noble hosted guests, dinner wasn't simply nourishment, it was theater. Swans roasted with feathers reattached for display, pies that released live birds when cut open, surprise. Even fish dyed bright colors to impress. All of it said, "Look how rich we are. We can waste food for entertainment." But tonight isn't feast night. Tonight is ordinary, which means barley bread, a pot of pottage, vegetables stewed until they've surrendered all personality. And maybe, if you're lucky, a slice of that goose. The Lord and his family will get the goose. The servants will get the broth the goose briefly waved at before being whisked away. In the corner, someone stirs a pan of onions and garlic sizzling in fat. The smell cuts through the air, sharp and comforting, reminding you that even the simplest dishes could feel like luxury when the cold walls pressed in. Another assistant crushes herbs with a mortar and pestle. Parsley, sage, a pinch of something imported and precious, perhaps cinnamon or pepper. Spice in a medieval castle wasn't just seasoning. It was status, a reminder that your lord had connections far beyond these stone walls. And tucked against the back wall, a small oven glows. A baker pulls out flat loaves, their tops cracked and dusted with flour. A stray dog, clearly well acquainted with this schedule, lurks near the baker's feet. He's not supposed to be there, but nobody kicks him out. Everyone knows a good kitchen dog keeps the rats honest. As you watch, you notice something tender in the chaos. Laughter. The kitchen is loud, smoky, and exhausting, but there are jokes passed between cooks, a wink here, a muttered curse followed by a chuckle there. In this world of strict hierarchy and stone-cold duties, the kitchen is one of the few places where warmth doesn't just come from the fire. And as the first trays are carried toward the hall, the smell of roasted goose and fresh bread trailing behind, you realize this is the heartbeat of the castle. The stones may protect it, the chapel may bless it, but the kitchen feeds it. Dinner is about to be served. The great hall waits like a cavern, its high timbered roof vanishing into shadow, banners hanging limp in the smoky haze. You step inside, and immediately the hum of voices surrounds you. Low, buzzing, expectant. The trestle tables stretch in long lines, rough planks resting on legs that wobble if you lean too hard. Candles drip along the center, their light pooling in uneven circles, and at the far end of the hall, the Lord's chair rises on a dais. Not quite a throne, but enough to make the point. The smell hits next. Roasted goose, barley bread, hot pottage, the faint sweetness of apples stewed in honey. It mingles with the smell of sweat and damp wool. Welcome to the medieval dining experience, where food and humanity were equally unavoidable. Servants sweep in with platters, moving quickly, almost invisibly, as if their very presence mustn't disturb the performance. A boy sets down a tray of bread in front of you, and it's warm, crusty, torn into rough halves rather than sliced. Knives are scarce. Most people eat with fingers, tearing chunks and dunking them into pottage bowls. A communal salt dish sits on the table. Reach for it, and you'll brush hands with your neighbor, though, let's be honest, medieval hands weren't exactly sanitized. The Lord arrives at last, sweeping into the hall in a gown trimmed with fur, a bright ring flashing on one finger. Everyone stands, or at least pauses, and then sits again when he does. His wife follows, her gown longer, her expression politely distant. Their presence isn't just dinner, it's performance. Everyone is meant to watch, to admire, to confirm the structure of this little universe. Then the goose is carved, and of course the best cuts head straight to the high table. Don't worry, you'll get broth, and maybe a wingtip if fortune smiles. But still, you chew with surprising satisfaction. Hunger, after all, is the best seasoning. Here's your historical fact of the evening. Forks do exist by now, but in most of Europe, they're considered a bit suspicious. Too dainty, too foreign. Why use a fork when God gave you hands? It would be centuries before anyone thought otherwise. And the obscure tidbit? Trenchers. The bread you're eating on, flat, hard, yesterday's loaf sliced into slabs, doubles as your plate. Juices soak in, flavors mingle, and by the end of the meal your trencher is either eaten or tossed to the servants and dogs. Disposable dishware, medieval style. Meanwhile, the minstrels begin to strum. Their lute strings ripple through the hall, trying to be heard over the clatter of mugs and the scrape of knives. One starts a ballad, the kind where heroes die tragically and maidens sigh a lot. The rhythm lulls you, even as someone across the hall laughs too loudly at a joke about sheep. Historians still debate whether these castle dinners were solemn, dignified affairs or just glorified cafeteria chaos. Looking around now, with spilled ale pooling under benches and the steady rise of chatter, you suspect the latter. The fire roars, plates are cleared, and night presses its hand against the stained glass windows. Dinner has ended, but the evening isn't over. Because what's a castle without entertainment? The benches scrape back, and the hall rearranges itself. Platters vanish, goblets are refilled, and the minstrels tune their lutes again. This is the hour where food gives way to spectacle. First come the stories. A bard, face creased with the wear of too many roads, steps into the circle of firelight. He begins with a tale of a knight who wandered too far into an enchanted wood. His voice rises and falls, the rhythm almost like chanting. Children stare wide-eyed. Adults lean back, bellies full, letting the tale wash over them. Somewhere in the back, someone snores. The bard pretends not to notice. Then the jugglers appear. Wooden clubs flash in the firelight, arcs of movement sharp against the smoky air. A gasp ripples through the crowd as one nearly drops a club, but doesn't. The trick, of course, is to always look as though disaster is only one heartbeat away. Keeps the audience awake. But the real entertainment of the evening isn't performance. It's gossip. Conversations buzz across the benches. Half-whispered tales of who owes coin, who insulted whom at the last hunt, and whether the neighboring lord's daughter is really as beautiful as the minstrels sing. Gossip was the medieval news network. Free, fast, and wildly unreliable. And here's your odd tidbit. Sometimes, for amusement, a trained bear or monkey might be brought into a hall like this. Imagine the chaos of fur, claws, and curious children under a timbered roof. Tonight, thankfully, no one thought that was a good idea. Still, the jokes fly. A servant drops a mug, and someone calls out, "Well, the ale's free to the floor, at least." Everyone chuckles, the kind of humor that requires no wit, only timing. And the rhythm of the night continues. Music, laughter, murmurs. The occasional hiccup of someone who's had one goblet too many. Scholars admit uncertainty about how long these entertainments stretched. Did they end early, with everyone trudging off to bed at a sensible hour? Or did they stretch late into the night, with firelight burning down to embers? Standing here, you feel it could go either way. The Lord rises at last, and the hall begins to settle. Guests bow, servants scurry. The minstrels let the final note hang in the smoky air. Slowly, The hall empties, footsteps echoing towards stone staircases and narrow chambers. The night grows deeper, and silence returns to the great hall, except for the dog curled by the hearth, dreaming, perhaps, of another fallen trencher tomorrow. And you're not finished yet. The castle still has secrets to reveal before it sleeps. Night falls differently inside stone. Out in the village, the sky yawns open, stars scatter, and owls call across fields. But here, within the fortress walls, the night tightens. Darkness doesn't just arrive. It presses in, clinging to corners, pooling in stairwells, curling around beams of timber like smoke. You walk the corridor now, a taper candle in hand. The flame bends with every draft, and you realize how alive this place feels at night. The walls creak, as if sighing from the day's weight. A rat darts across the floor and vanishes behind a barrel. The air smells of cold stone, wax, and a faint tang of iron from the torches hammered into brackets. The great hall, once thundering with voices, is quiet now, its ashes glowing faintly red. Servants move like ghosts, cleaning, setting things straight, their footfalls muffled on the rushes. Somewhere above, a hinge groans and then slams. Someone late to bed, or a guard careless in his duty. You pass the chapel, its door cracked open. Inside, a solitary figure kneels before a flickering lamp. Prayer is a form of duty here, no less important than sharpening swords. You pause, listening to the murmurs, though you can't make out the words. They could be supplications for protection, or perhaps just thanks that the goose didn't burn. Here's tonight's historical fact. Most castles kept a curfew bell. Once rung, the fires were banked, the gates locked, and the streets outside fell silent. The French phrase couvre-feu, cover the fire, is the origin of the word curfew. Yes, your teenager owes his early bedtime to medieval fire safety. An obscure tidbit slips in with the shadows. Glowworms. In rural castles, especially in gardens or by damp stone, people noticed their faint light. Children might catch them in little pots, bringing them inside as makeshift nightlights. No LED lamps required, just insect romance chemistry at work. Historians still debate whether the night inside castles felt safe or unsettling. On one hand, thick walls kept dangers at bay. On the other, those same walls muffled every sound, leaving you alone with your heartbeat and the occasional scratching in the rafters. And you, walking the hall with your flickering candle, you realize both are true. Safety and unease live side by side here. You're wrapped in stone, but stone has its own kind of silence, and silence can be very loud. From outside, faintly, you hear the sound of boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground. The watch is beginning its rounds. Step through the postern door and the cold slaps your face, sharp and unkind. The courtyard lies hushed under starlight, the well glimmering faintly as if holding a piece of moon. A torch flares near the gatehouse, illuminating two guards shifting their weight against the chill. Their spears clink softly as they move. You trail the wall walk, that narrow strip of stone high above the yard. Each step crunches grit beneath your boots. Below, the village smolders with dying hearths. Above, the stars prick the sky in a scatter of pale fire. The air tastes of smoke and damp earth. The guards don't talk much. Silence is part of their job, listening, not speaking. But occasionally, One mutters about sore feet, or whether the baker's daughter promised him a loaf tomorrow. Guards are human, after all. From this height, you see the moat shimmer like black glass. And you wonder, was it really always full of water? The answer is not always. Some moats were dry, a wide ditch meant to slow attackers, not drown them. A reminder that history rarely matches the movie set. Odd tidbit of the night. Certain watchmen carried clappers, wooden noisemakers, not just to sound alarms but to scare away spirits. Practical defense mixed with superstition. Imagine a guard pacing the walls, spinning a rickety noisemaker, just in case a ghost wandered by. The night is still, except for the hoot of an owl from the trees. A torch flickers, nearly gutters, then flares again. The guards trade places, rubbing their hands against the chill, eyes scanning fields that seem endless and empty. You know danger isn't here tonight, but the weight of their watching is real. Historians still debate whether night watches were genuinely effective or mostly symbolic, a kind of look-busy ritual for castle defense. Judging by the half-asleep sway of one guard, you lean toward the second option. You lean against the wall, breath fogging, and let the cold seep into your skin. Somewhere, deep inside, the castle settles for sleep. But out here on the wall walk under the stars, the night stretches endless. And tomorrow waits, with all its noise and labor, deadening fields that seem endless and empty. You know danger isn't here tonight, but the weight of their watching is real. Inside again, the candle gutters as you pull the heavy door shut, and the hush feels deeper now that you've tasted the cold air outside. Stone walls drink up every sound. Even your footsteps feel swallowed before they echo. The castle is sleeping, or at least pretending to. You make your way up a spiral stair, the kind that narrows just enough to force you to hug the wall. The air grows warmer with every turn, scented faintly with wood smoke rising from unseen chambers. Doors line the corridor above, each leading to rooms layered with blankets, prayers, and secrets. The Lord's chamber glows faintly under its heavy oak door. Inside, you imagine the flicker of a large hearth, a bed hung with curtains, fur piled thick as if daring winter to intrude. Outside his door, two guards stand like statues, their faces stern though their eyes blink too often. You suspect they are battling the same drowsiness you are. The guest chambers are quieter. Snores leak through the planks in long, wheezing patterns, like badly tuned bagpipes. Somewhere, a child whimpers in a dream, hushed quickly by a soft voice. The castle breathes with these little sounds. Snore, creak, whisper, like a sleeping beast. And here's your fact for the night. Noble families often slept in the same room with their servants. Privacy was rare. Warmth was more important than solitude. Curtains were drawn not for modesty, but for insulation. Your obscure tidbit. Some castles had urine pots stationed in corners of hallways. Yes, medieval life wasn't glamorous at night. Better a clay pot than stumbling down 5 flights of stairs to find the garderobe in the dark. Historians still debate whether the night was truly restful in castles or restless, interrupted by dogs barking, guards changing, and the echo of hooves on the drawbridge. You can picture both. Deep silence pierced suddenly by alarm. Sleep, but with one eye open. You pause at a narrow window slit. The moon rides high, pale and silent. Inside the chamber behind you, someone coughs. A chair shifts. You move on, careful not to disturb the peace or what passes for it. And as you climb toward the upper tower, the air cools again. The castle narrows, squeezing you higher, like it wants to show you its secrets. The dawn comes slow, hesitant, as if the sun is shy about intruding on stone. You stand at the tower window and watch the black sky soften into ash gray, then pale blue, then a thin wash of rose along the horizon. The first sound isn't a rooster. It's the clatter of a bucket. Down in the yard, servants are already hauling water, their breath clouding as they chatter. A sleepy horse nickers, shaking frost from its mane. From the kitchen block, faint smoke curls upward, carrying the promise of bread, or at least porridge. The castle stirs, not all at once, but in layers. Guards change shifts, stamping their feet on the frozen ground. Cooks stoke embers into flame. A dog stretches, yawns, and trots after its master. And in the Lord's chamber, you imagine a servant slipping quietly inside, setting fresh rushes underfoot, drawing curtains back to let in pale gold light. You feel dawn like a reset button. The castle becomes itself again, not a looming shadow but a living machine of people and duties. Here's your morning fact. Castle days began early. Sunrise often marked the start of work, with bells or horns signaling the household. Leisure came later if it came at all. Odd tidbit. Some castles kept geese as watch animals. Fierce, noisy, and impossible to bribe, geese were sometimes more reliable than guards. Imagine your peaceful dawn interrupted by furious honking. Effective, if not soothing. Historians still debate whether mornings were greeted with joy or weary resignation. Romantic paintings suggest golden light and bustling life, but the truth was probably more yawning, more shivering, more porridge again. The village outside is waking, too. Smoke ribbons rise from roofs, and figures shuffle toward fields. The castle looms above them, just as it did yesterday, and will tomorrow, watchful, protective, and slightly drafty. And you lean against the window ledge, warmed now by the first rays of sun. The night has passed. The stone exhales. The day begins again, ordinary and extraordinary at once. The courtyard is alive now, no longer cloaked in night's hush. You step down from the tower into the bustle, the stone flags damp from melting frost. Boots thud, buckets splash, chickens scatter in indignant flurries. The quiet fortress you crept through last evening has transformed into a hive. Servants hurry about with practiced rhythm. A boy leads 2 mules toward the gate, muttering complaints that sound centuries old. The blacksmith hammers iron at the forge, sparks spitting like fireflies. Women carry baskets, filled with bread loaves so uneven they look like siblings who barely resemble each other. The air has shifted from cold stone and smoke to a cocktail of wet hay, yeast, and manure. An aroma both unromantic and absolutely medieval. You wander past the kitchen doorway. Inside, the clatter is relentless. Knives chopping onions, spoons scraping pots, bread crusts cracking under strong hands. Fires roar in the hearth, and the smell of stewed cabbage dominates like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave. Your daily fact: kitchens in castles were often separate buildings or wings to reduce fire risk. Flames and dry rushes don't mix well, and stone lords weren't fond of rebuilding their entire home every few winters. Your curious tidbit. Some kitchens employed a boy called a turnbroach, whose sole job was to rotate the spit for roasting meat. Imagine the monotony. Hours of staring at a dripping haunch of venison, turning it inch by inch. If today's kids complain about screen time limits, you could counter with, "At least you're not a human rotisserie." Historians still debate whether meals were moments of communal joy or just functional feeding frenzies. Some records describe laughter and music. Others, quiet lines of servants ladling out broth. You suspect it was both, depending on the Lord's mood. Near the well, washerwomen kneel with cloth and soapwort, their chatter drifting like birdsong, though occasionally punctured by sharp laughter. A stray dog lurks nearby, calculating his chances at scraps. And above it all, banners stir in the morning breeze, their colors brighter in sunlight than under the moon. The castle has shed its ghostly midnight shell. It is wide awake, practical, loud, and unmistakably alive. You slip away from the courtyard, seeking quieter corners. Every castle has them, nooks the bustle can't quite reach. Down a side passage you find the chapel. Its heavy door creaks like an old throat, and inside is a softer world. Sunlight filters through narrow stained glass, staining the floor in muted blues and reds. The air smells faintly of beeswax, stone, and the slow persistence of prayer. Benches line the nave, worn smooth by elbows and knees. A priest mutters his morning devotions, barely acknowledging your presence. His voice drones like a lullaby, steady, timeless, comforting in its own weary way. On the altar, a single candle burns, its smoke curling lazily upward. And there's your fact. Castles almost always had chapels, often richly decorated even when the rest of the household lived plainly. Faith was not an accessory. It was the rhythm of time itself, marking hours, days, seasons. Your odd tidbit. Some chapels had tiny squints, little peepholes that allowed servants to watch Mass from adjoining rooms without entering. Imagine kneeling at prayer, fully aware that an eye might be peering at you from the wall. Privacy, medieval edition. Historians still debate the sincerity of daily devotion. Was everyone deeply faithful, or did many attend only because absence would be noticed? The truth, like faith itself, is hidden in hearts. Leaving the chapel, you find yourself in a dim corridor leading to storerooms. Here, barrels of ale sit in neat rows, sacks of grain lean like sleepy giants, and the air is rich with the dusty perfume of abundance. Or scarcity, depending on the year. Rats scurry in shadows, bold as tiny bandits. This, too, is the castle's life. Prayer upstairs, porridge downstairs, order and chaos coexisting. The sun climbs higher, and with it, the noise outside rises again. Horses whinnying, blacksmith striking, guards calling out at the gate. You pause in the half-light of the storeroom, feeling the castle's pulse. It is not just walls and towers, but a living weave of faith, food, laughter, and labor. Every stone hums with centuries of footsteps, and you breathe it in, a little drowsy, a little amused. The castle holds you gently, like a story told for the 1,000th time. The day ripens into afternoon, then slowly cools again toward evening. The bustle ebbs, replaced by smaller sounds. The rhythmic sweep of a broom, the chatter of sparrows perched along the walls, the muffled clang of a gate being shut just a little tighter as the sun leans toward the horizon. You walk once more across the courtyard. The same stones that felt damp with morning frost now warm from sunlight. Shadows stretch long and lazy, pooling beneath archways and staircases like spilled ink. People are tired now. Servants rest on steps with bowls of thin soup. Children chase each other half-heartedly. Guards swap jokes that sound rehearsed. The castle breathes out, a sigh of stone and smoke. Remember that crooked stair you climbed the first night? You pass it again, the steps as uneven as ever, though now glowing faintly orange from the setting sun. Castles do not change quickly, but your eyes have. What once seemed forbidding now feels familiar, almost kind. Your last fact tonight: medieval castles were rarely silent at night. Even in sleep, life hummed. Fires crackled, animals stirred, guards shifted on walls, and the occasional lute or whispered story carried into the dark. Peace was relative but never absolute. Your curious tidbit: in some castles, the lord's dogs slept inside the hall, both as warmth and as primitive burglar alarms. Imagine trying to sneak around with a pack of restless mastiffs snoring at your feet. That's medieval home security, canine edition. And, of course, historians still debate whether castles were primarily fortresses, homes, or symbols of authority. Perhaps they were all three at once, depending on who was looking and what they feared. You step toward the wall walk one last time. The view is vast. Hills softening in twilight, the sky shifting to lavender, smoke from distant cottages curling upward like threads. A crow sails by, slow and deliberate. Somewhere below, the kitchen empties of noise, only embers glowing in the hearth. Now the castle begins to settle into its night. The stones grow cool beneath your touch, and the air smells faintly of pine smoke and damp earth. Everything slows. The courtyard, once clattering with boots and buckets, now holds only the hush of evening, a silence so deep you feel it more than hear it. You lean against the wall, the rough surface oddly comforting, steady against your shoulder. The sky melts into darker shades, indigo, then blue so deep it feels bottomless. Stars blink into being one by one, as though shy at first, then more confident. Above the towers, the moon slides free from a veil of cloud, softening every corner with pale silver light. Even the banners, which earlier snapped and danced in the wind, now sag with weariness, content to rest until morning. Somewhere in the hall, you hear a lull of voices, lower now, gentler, the clink of cups subdued, laughter tapering into murmurs. A dog sighs in its sleep. From a high window, the faint notes of a lute float into the air, fragile and uncertain, then dissolve. The castle is not silent, but it is quiet in a way that makes you want to close your eyes. The world beyond these walls blurs. Fields fade into shadow, rivers dissolve into mist, roads soften into nothingness. Inside, warmth lingers, a glow of firelight, the hush of prayer, the memory of footsteps on stone. You breathe slower now. The story has wound itself down, a thread neatly coiled, leaving only calm. So rest here, at the edge of the battlements, the air cool on your face, the stone sure beneath you. The castle will keep watch, and as you drift, you may find yourself smiling at the thought. Even centuries ago, people longed for the same things: safety, food, laughter, and a little peace at the end of the day. Sleep well,